Good morning, Mr. Freeman. Dewey Freeman in the house here with Mark Sylvester
Good
and the
morning, Mark.
elders. How are you, sir?
I am well. We just finished a 5-day intensive training on attachment and development and working with horses, and it was
Wow. It was the same
unbelievably.
people for the whole week for all 5 days.
Yes, we
Yeah.
had 35 people, which
Wow. How many horses?
42. And
And how many sensei?
how many what?
So how many teachers? Just you?
I'm the main teacher, and then there's Kimberly, and another woman named Rebecca, and another woman named Megan.
Wow.
But I'm the main teacher, and they help,
Yeah, you
and
you
and
need
they
assistance.
yeah, and they also teach. But one of the things that the way that I teach is very experiential.
Yeah.
So you can talk about attachment, or you can really do some experiments and exercises that bring it up and let people feel their attachment or lack thereof, and that usually brings up a lot of stuff for them. Um,
I'm curious, in those intensives, there is a point somewhat early on when transformation starts, and there's the synapses are firing fairly quickly after that as the transformation flow intensifies.
mhm.
What's your experience of that with the people?
As far as whether that happens or when it happens,
How you
or
warn them about it?
ah, that's really interesting.
That's the interesting part of it, right? Is like, do you let them just, oh, geez, what the hell is happening to me? Or, hey, this is going to happen. Or, this might be happening now for us. I've seen it in some of your eyes.
It's sort of all the above. Here's one of the interesting things about this. This is a we are teaching people who are therapists or becoming therapists,
Oh,
and so that they can work with this with whomever they're working with. And we this can be done in a couple of different ways. One, it can be done in a way where we're working with people with personal growth. And that's actually what Trevor, Michael, and I are going to be doing in June. Or in this case, we're teaching so people can work with us from when they're working with people. So we ask people to literally sort of have their student hats on.
right, right.
However, that does not preclude people really sometimes dropping in pretty heavy duty. Um, the big shift that I begin seeing is when we go from teaching from a sort of an intellectual, here's the material, I want to teach you how to count to 1, 2, 3, to beginning to take that and drop it into an experiential level. Um, and you can actually see energy
Mm,
here with people. And then as we're dropping in, you can see
mm,
people's eyes do change and their breath changes, and you can see dropping into
mm.
more of their core. Um, the teaching piece and what I actually hope for is that people learn this and they sort of get it in their bones.
That's the integration piece that happens, right?
That's the integration piece, and
Or the
that's
or the
when,
chalice, right? The
yes,
forging.
yeah, and that's when they become really competent with it.
So I have a question. With the work you do, is um, psychology and psychiatry and this kind of work is is a medical science. I mean, there's degrees in medicine in this and way that medicine is taught, or so I'm told. I'm not a medical doctor. Is they use a method called Sodotu, and I'm curious if you do that. It's Sodoto. And when I learned this, because someone's a doctor, a PhD doctor, said to me, "Oh, you're doing Sodotu." I was like, "Well, what the heck is that?"
That'd be
And
what I'd ask you.
it's
What
see
the heck is
one,
it? Ah,
do one, teach one. So I'm in the ER and you're working with me and you see me stitch up your thumb. You see me attend to that. And then the next stitch requirement, the next injured patient comes in and okay, Dewey, you do it. And then the next one comes in and Dewey, you teach Bob how to do it. Boom, boom, boom. See
got
one,
it.
do one, teach one. So I'm curious, without knowing that until just now, is that a part of how you do the integration?
Yeah, I think we included one more step,
Hmm.
and that would be see one, experience one, do one, teach one.
Oh, got it.
Because it's like using your example. It's like, yeah, like see me stitching something up, somebody's finger or thumb, to really know what that's like.
Oh, and
You,
then you stitch their thumb.
yeah, then they have to, they experience it,
Okay, there you go.
and then they can do it, then they can teach it. One of the pieces that we talk about a lot is that, and this is one of the differences between what we do and the pure medical model, is that we cannot take someone further therapeutically than we've gone ourselves.
That makes entirely perfect sense.
So what that means is if I'm working with somebody, and this was on attachment development and cognitive development, and also social emotional development and neurological development. But if I'm working with a person who, say, for instance, has some attachment disturbances in their life, if I'm not pretty clean about my own attachment,
Mm-hmm.
for instance, what I'm going to do is whenever they reach the point that I've gone, I will either purposely, mostly subconsciously, stop it.
Mm.
Um, so, and we have what we also teach is at different developmental ages.
Well, sure. White belt, yellow belt, black belt, green belt, right?
Yes, exactly. If I have a green belt, for instance, and I can teach you the basics. Or if I'm teaching horseback riding and I can walk and trot, but I can't canter, I will stop there.
Mm.
Um,
So I'm curious, when you're teaching teachers, because I love train the trainers, um, if they have not reached, to your point, if they've not reached those certain levels, and you have people coming into class at all different belt levels, but to be what they are, I'm going to guess they've got to be darn close to black belt already. But then once, it's the interesting thing about black belt is, the 356 skills you have to demonstrate proficiency in on that black belt test, and then it's welcome to the club. You're just now starting again, and now we
exactly.
right. So to your point is that you can only teach to the level you've already achieved. This week gave them a chance to reach higher levels of their own personal development so that they can then take their clientele to those levels. Did I get all that right, doctor?
That is 1,000% correct.
Okay.
And part of what I say, it's fascinating that you just said what you said, is, and this disturbs some people. Most of the people that we're working with either are very close to completing their master's degrees, or they have their master's degrees and maybe are beginning their doctorate. We have a few people who have their doctorate in this program. But part of what I say is, when you get your master's degree, or if you go straight through and even get a doctorate, when you graduate is when you begin to learn to be a therapist.
Mm.
And then the other thing, and this is a really interesting thing, is I come in from a different perspective. Part of my perspective is a non-pathological perspective. Part of my perspective is a is working and coming in from an experiential and somatic perspective. The example I often use is, somebody can watch someone else ride a horse and see all of what they do, and see
See one.
all of how that.
See one.
Yes. And they can have all the theory around how to do that. And maybe they've even been on a horse or two, but you can't really, there's a lot of theory around horses and horseback riding, for instance. But you can't learn that unless you get on a horse. And then you can't learn that. And what I actually say to people in horseback riding is, you probably have to ride regularly for a minimum of 5 years before you begin being competent. Because in the beginning, your horse is actually helping you. And there's a shift in there to where you actually begin helping your horse.
This is making me think of what I want to title today's show. I want to call it Achieving Mastery. And in any of
Love that name, by the way.
well, in any of our life's pursuits, it is the thing we have chosen to master or become a master of, or to demonstrate mastery of. You can use that word a lot of different ways. Mastering is a noble goal.
Totally.
And in that pursuit, whoever is listening to this in life, kind of measure where you're at. Like, are you even aware that you're on a path towards mastery of a thing? That would be probably an important thing to have an intention. I want to master this thing, and then I'm going to master this thing. That's my particular MO, is to find a thing that completely intrigues me that I can become immersed in, like these therapists did for 5 days, so that I can, in some case, either finish my path to mastery or begin my path to mastery, and have just a whole body experience towards getting to that point. And knowing, I think you need to know in any pursuit where the goal line is. So when you get there, you can say, I am there. And someone who's ahead of you can acknowledge you are here. Grandmaster Wheaton walks up to you at the end of the test and has you drop your belt, and then he fits the next belt on you. And he has acknowledged you have met the requirements. In the case of master arts, it's very specific, but in others it isn't. I mean, are you a master gardener? You know, when you said it takes 5 years, that's probably when you, as you said, that energy shifts. So all of this is going towards me thinking that I would love to have us continue the rest of the conversation around mastery and what that looks like. And I'd like to frame it around a lens we both are aware of, which is called the hierarchy of competence.
Love it.
So why don't you explain to the listener what that means?
Ah.
That was a
Took me.
long setup, boss.
Well, you are a master at the setup. Um, Mastery. We briefly, before we got on the show, spoke about competency.
And I think what might help our listener is if I show a picture very quickly.
That'd be fantastic.
That'll help.
Mastery to me is knowing something in your bones. And I think
I think that's here.
Yeah, that's here. Can you see my little arrow or not?
I can't, but that's okay.
Okay.
Let's walk them through this and then we'll
Yeah.
get back to where we're looking at each other.
Yeah, let's begin talking about unconscious incompetence.
Okay. Start. So everybody is take a little note of this: unconscious incompetence, conscious incompetence, conscious competence, and unconscious competence. Okay, we'll go back. Okay, so we'll start at the beginning.
The unconscious incompetence is you don't know what you don't know.
Yeah.
And that's a big deal. And one of the pieces, and I alluded to this a little bit in one of our earlier shows, is one of the things, this is a bit of an aside, one of the things is many times we are so unaware of what we don't know that we can actually pretend like we know it.
Is that conscious incompetence?
No, not yet. At least not in my mind. But it's like, I don't know what I don't know about X, Y, and Z. And what's really important about that is, at least in my view, we need somebody to ask, like I would ask. Like you're like 1,000 times more tech savvy than I am. So instead of me pretending like I'm tech savvy, I might say, Mark, what do I need here? Because I don't even know what I need.
Right.
And the unconscious incompetence requires a level of humility, curiosity, and openness to really begin to move to the level of conscious incompetence. The conscious incompetence has to do with that I'm beginning to get that I don't know. And I have some level of understanding that there's a lot here.
Yeah. Right.
That I really just like, whoa, okay, I have a long way to go to learn this. And I think that, and I'd love to hear your take on this. The conscious incompetence for me is the place where we begin to learn what questions to ask.
1,000%. And you'll notice the book that is within reach of my hand.
Beautiful questions, beautiful book. Yes.
And I feel like the thing that I'm wanting to master is how to form questions. And I'm I appreciate that you think I do a good job of it. I am constantly working on that. And I think the reason I do that is that I have an insatiable curiosity. And
Exactly.
the trick is to, if I'm curious, I need to answer questions that will satisfy my curiosity. So it's a question that's going to get the most juice out of the orange, if you will. I can't get it. Yes or no is not going to scratch that itch. I've mixed three metaphors there. Uh, I
It's impressive.
but for me now, with access to the internet and a smart watch, if I hear a word that I don't know, I take note. I have notes constantly. I've already
Mhm.
written three things down with our conversation. I will then Google the word, and then almost always that's going to lead me into this big tent of new stuff that I'm like. Then here's what happens. I decide, do I want to open the door and go into that tent, or am I satisfied knowing what that word means? So now I've increased my vocabulary by one and my awareness by a tiny bit, but I'm not. I can decide then, do I need to know that? Right, because that's the other piece, right? When you're curious, like you could just be distracted and have what I call Brownian motion. That's physics. You're a physicist. You know what Brownian
Mhm.
motion is. So I'm just doing that. I don't want to do that. I want to be way more focused, right? So that conscious incompetence. Oh, and the other thing is, because I live my life with a camera on me, so people can see my incompetence written on my face when I don't know
All over.
what the
Yes.
fuck I'm talking about, right?
Well, and here's the piece to this, and this is a piece I really appreciate about you. The questions that we ask when we're in the conscious incompetence, and even when we begin to move to the conscious competence, they're open-ended. And when we ask those questions, from my view, need to be questions that we're not always that we're not already projecting the answer to.
Can you have more than 1,000%? Like if you already know the answer, then you're just pimping the audience, right?
Right.
Because like I know the answer and I could tell you the answer, but the credibility for the answer is going to come from the person whose mouth from which it exits. And then
Mhm.
that's typically the expert that I'm talking to or interviewing in just one-on-one conversation. If you're that's called leading the witness, Your Honor.
Well, exactly. And when I'm teaching, uh, about almost 2 years ago now, I was in a horsemanship clinic, and one of the trainers who I respect dearly, yeah, I was maybe day 3 or 4, I forget. And she came up to me and said, Dewey, one of the things I appreciate about you is you're an honest student.
Hmm.
And that might be one of the best compliments I've ever received from anybody.
Especially to a teacher.
Yes. And when I have students who are truly honest students, I I can just sink to the depths of working with
Yeah,
them in any way needed.
yeah.
When I have students who ask a question from the point of, here's my question, and I'm really going to tell you what I know instead of trying to learn, that's a whole different process.
I call that speechifying.
Exactly. I like that word.
Right, they're
So,
speechifying.
the way to move, for me, to move to that next step from the conscious incompetence to the conscious competence is that level of openness, that level of honesty, that level of pure curiosity. And what I ask people to do when I'm teaching is I'll say, you know a lot, because most people know a fair amount. And this may be different, but what I want you to do is take all that I'm teaching and sit with it for a while and then take what you want, let go of what you don't want, and integrate what you want to into whatever you're doing. And that's where the conscious competence begins to form. Um, and the conscious competence to me still is a huge, huge place of learning.
When I encounter someone at that point in a conversation, I'll say, and I heard this years ago, I know you don't know the answer, but if you did, what do you think it might be?
Nice.
Gives them permission to free range and not be held accountable for being right.
Exactly.
So I could be a therapist.
You could. You've done that with me more than once, just to let you know.
Oh, that's called just being an elder, dude. Right? That's right.
There's
Elders
some.
helping elders. Let's move on to conscious competence.
Again, I will go back to horseback riding. Conscious competence. One of the interesting pieces about riding is they're so, in many ways, riding is very simple and it's not easy.
What you mean it's like anything in life?
Yes,
Like
exactly.
the game of Go, which is just some pebbles on a piece of wood. And I remember the tagline from it: minutes to learn, lifetime to master.
Exactly. So in horseback riding, your hands are in a certain place and your legs are in a certain place and your seat is a certain way and you're sitting a certain way. There's like a whole bunch of different pieces, and then you get there and then your horse responds, and so you're responding to your horse. And you want to turn right, you can turn right sometimes. But if you're on a trail and you have to turn right really sharp and then side pass to get somewhere and get around a rock, and it's like conscious competence to me is you sort of know what you're doing, but you got to think about everything. It's like, okay, I know what I need to do with my right leg and my left hand and which way my body really sort of wants to be, what my horse may be doing, whether they're going to plant a foot. And all of that is a thought process.
And it's still that notion of conscious is your I'm thinking of myself like with a recipe. I know what all the steps are, but I haven't done it 1,000 times yet. So I need to kind of look back, and even if it's a mental model that I have, to your point of my hands in the right position, am I doing all the right stuff? And do I? I'm not even. I don't know how you make a horse turn right. Um, but you do all of those things, and then sometimes you get them all in the right order and the horse turns right and you lock that in. You go, yep, that was the right order. Unless you got a false positive and it was the horse wanted to go right, you had nothing to do with
Well,
it.
and sometimes that happens. But even sometimes, going back to the recipe thing, this is an interesting thing. I'm not a great cook. Thank goodness Kimberly is. I can read a recipe. And I go, okay, a quarter cup of this. Then I take 20 minutes to get a quarter cup of this. And then
Because you're going to make sure it's exactly a quarter
exactly.
cup.
And then a teaspoon of this. And is that a real teaspoon? Is it a little too much? And
I was
then
teaching a guy once and he held two. I looked at him. I said, "You're stuck. What's wrong?" And he goes, "One of these is a teaspoon. I just don't know which."
exactly. That's why I get teaspoons that have it written on it, because I can read.
So keep
And
going.
and I will do all of that and something will turn out fairly okay. And here's my imagination about what you do. It's like you got the recipe and you sort of glance at it, and maybe it's something you haven't made that many times or something, but it's like you get a feel for it.
Mm,
And
mm.
it's like you can go, yeah, that needs a quarter cup here and a this or that. But then it's like, now I'm going to throw in a dash of this
You freestyle.
and I'm going to do this. And if I were asking you, Mark, why do you put that and that? And you go, it just felt right.
Hmm. And in life, if anybody who's listening you're a carpenter or you are a service provider or somebody, whatever it is, you have an intuition, which is that experience, right? That
Right.
leads you through. But it's fair to say, though, that you earned that by the 10, as Gladwell talks about, the 10,000 hours, right,
Right.
of doing that thing. You earned the ability. I was this exact point was made very clear to me at the Picasso Museum in Barcelona. And he, all of his early work in his teen years before he went to Paris, very, very traditional portraits and landscapes. I mean, pixel perfect, photographic, like perfect stuff. And you look at Picasso, who's all over the place. It's what most people think about him. It was because he had mastered that he was able to then
Exactly.
free range, much like going back to cooking. People who are not skilled in the kitchen think that spaghetti is you open up and there's a little everything in there because that's how they saw their mom do.
Right.
Mom put a little bit of everything in there. Oh, okay, there must be a little bit of everything. You have to. I think you have to earn that.
Right.
To your point, and just a little background. There's a cookbook store in New York City that's still around called Kitchen Arts and Letters. It's up on the upper east side, and I had an office in New York with my software company, and whenever I would go to visit, I would always go up there. I'd call in ahead, and I'm really interested in books about food, but also books of menus because and with no recipes, no
Mm-hmm.
recipe at all. It's like, oh,
Oh, wow.
there's the a friend gifted me. They went on a 90-day world tour, and her
Mm-hmm.
gift to me was the entire set of menus because that's
Oh
all
my
I need.
gosh.
It's like, oh, that went with that, and they paired it with that. Oh wow, I had
Mm-hmm.
never thought of that. And so that's, someone had said to me a long time that cooks follow recipes, chefs write recipes,
Exactly.
right? I want to move
Well,
last bit
I
on.
want to actually let me go back a minute
Okay.
because I also want to bring in another piece. But you talked about spaghetti. Spaghetti to me is I can boil noodles and dump them in a strainer, and I can open a jar of ragu. And if I want a little meat in it, I could, brown some ground turkey or beef, and I mix those together, and that's my meal. If you ask me to make any of that from scratch, I would go to a restaurant. And so part of it is that we also need to know our limitations.
Yes.
Um, and I wanted moving into the conscious or unconscious competence. I think we were sort of getting there.
Yep. Yep.
Is that where you were going to go?
Yep.
Is the biggest thing I want to say about that is it takes time and experience and time and experience and time and experience.
And I'm going to insert the word practice.
Practice. Yeah, experience to me means practice, but
Doing
practice is perfect.
doing the thing.
Yes. And then there's another level.
Mm.
And here's that other level. I have probably between 70 and 80,000 contact hours as a therapist. And some of those hours are as a teacher, but somewhere around 80,000. I've been doing this in one way or another for 50 years. So even if I have 1,500 contact hours a year, that's
So I
75,000,
think I have 50,000 hours of being a smartass.
which you unconsciously competently do that very well.
I don't know that that's what a lofty goal to achieve too, but keep going.
You're good. Then there's another step, and that's going back to the unconscious and competent,
Yeah,
because
great. Yes.
the more that I know, the less that I
Yeah.
know that I know.
Yeah. And that's where you complete the circle.
Right. And that's a big deal to me.
Being aware enough to allow and have, I think it's two things. One is ego strength enough to allow yourself to be unconsciously incompetent, to know you don't know something and be okay with that. That's ego strength to me.
That fits.
And then being able to um, be, as you started off this conversation, be humble enough to say, don't know that. I know my partner in my day job. I ask, we talk to, subject matter experts in a variety of fields
Hmm.
all day, every day. I do not know their stuff. I don't know
Exactly.
it, and I'll say, and I actually make a point of letting them know I don't know that stuff, and that the reason I'm talking to them is so that I can learn a little bit, but more importantly, to enlist them into my larger network of people who know what I need to know at any given time.
Right.
So I can say, we got to get Jake. Jake knows this stuff. I don't know it. I know enough to know to call Jake.
Exactly.
One of the things in martial arts, and because I didn't spend as many hours by two orders of magnitude, but I spent my whole 50s 3-4 nights a week on the mat and all day Saturday. Um, Master Wheaton would say, and he's a grandmaster, he said, I still work on my sidekick every day.
Yes.
Right. And it's an example of unconscious competence is when Mike Kimberly and I went to Europe to receive an award from the World Technology Conference. I was Sunday, we had the day off, and we were in a seaside town in Marseille, France.
Mm.
And it was quiet, very quiet. And we're walking through an area, and we both had that feeling of not being safe or being aware, like radar was lit. But we didn't see anybody. There was no threatening people. There was none of that. It was a sense, and we both had it. We both looked at each other. Do you? Yeah, me too. And once we got to like a big square where there were lots of people and everything was fine, I said, you know what went through my mind when we were walking? And I don't even know, it just automatically happened, was I was reviewing my back kick.
Hmm. Hmm.
Right. And like how, boom, I would do this and so it's probably my conscious competence of, okay, I knew what all the things were. The unconscious competence was the sense of danger. Right.
Right.
You know, I was alert enough to know. And then it was like, what tool did I have? Okay, well, I hope my back kick would work. Did I get that right, Doc?
Hmm. Totally. Totally. And what's interesting is if you spent 5 hours in the dojo every day for 30 years, you wouldn't be thinking about that.
None of that.
Um, so part of this, I think, too, part of the competency has to do with picking and choosing what we're going to spend our time on and what we really want to go for.
What do we want to achieve mastery in?
Yeah. Um, and we don't have to be unconsciously competent in everything. We can be at different stages, and one of the biggest things that you said is you know who to call.
Right. And you're not afraid to call. And
Right.
there's no shade on you for calling.
Right. I mean, it's like, I mean, part of this, our conversations are about, I mean, we're doing this for the man and civilized nation. And I mean, Traver is a top level martial artist.
Yeah.
I have no doubt that X, Y, and Z can happen, and he won't be thinking about it, and somebody will
Right.
be flat out on the ground before, and he won't even know what has happened.
Right.
So I'm not there, but I know Traver.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it's like, so there's two things. One is if I really need that, and I know that I'm going to need that, I have a resource. The other is if I want to go another step, I can go to Traver and say, what do you think about this?
Mm-hmm.
You know, and I mean, it's the same way with you. It's like you whip through this technology stuff, and I'm going, okay, it takes me 10 minutes to get on Zoom.
No, you already copped to the difference between a teaspoon and a tablespoon. So I
Yeah.
know what box to put you in. I want to finish up the last maybe 5 or 6 minutes on. Let's take this lesson and the things that we've talked about. We talked about experiential learning. Which led us into. I love how our learning, our conversations are always journeys, and led us to this idea of achieving mastery, and then led us through a teaching about competence and incompetence, conscious and unconscious, and how that works. And the first time I heard that, Malcolm Gladwell taught it from the stage here at the Arlington Theater in Santa Barbara, and I just went, "Oh, that just explains everything." I wrote it down on something. I didn't go to take notes, but I wrote it on some because I didn't want to
Sure.
forget it.
Mm-hmm.
So let's bring all that home into a practical thing. When I'm reading the notes and the comments and the things that people write on the nation in the community board, a lot of it has to do, I think there's a lot around relationships and how I'm going to try to get to the question, doctor. Is it possible to be unconsciously competent at relationships, or is the best we're ever going to get
Mm.
is conscious competence? Like I know I should shut my mouth right now. I don't want to don't want to I want to de-escalate. I know I should do that, but I don't. So I'm
Mm.
conscious.
Mm.
I know the skill, but I don't always employ it. Or could I be like, you know, uh, Jedi at this stuff? What here's where I'm trying to go is to let guys know that with relationships, because hopefully we always have someone we love and care for, and we are caring for in our lives, our whole life. We're social creatures, and that's a blessing to be able to have that we want to achieve a level of mastery in how we comport ourselves and how we comport ourselves within a relationship. And how do we know? I'm just kind of speaking to myself right now, but trying to figure out, where am I in that circle? Where are
Got
we
it.
in that circle?
This is totally off the top of my head. The question you just asked, I don't know that I've ever been asked that question.
This is the third time in 9 shows that you've said that, sir. I keep track.
Good.
To
Well,
me, as a guy who asks questions, as I said, I want to ask a question and someone says, whoa, never heard that question before.
well,
80,000 hours and you hadn't heard that question. Okay, well, you
that
have
is true.
permission to go crazy. We'll keep the students after class.
Perfect. I think in a previous show, I spoke about the concept of contact over time creates connection,
Yep.
connection over time creates relationship, relationship over time creates intimacy. I do not believe that with even all the work that I've done, that I am unconsciously competent at relationships.
Hmm.
I'm not at that level. What I know is that I am unconsciously competent at contact,
Hmm.
which is the building block of all relationships.
Yeah.
The reason I don't think I'll ever become unconsciously competent with relationships is none of them are predictable.
Yeah.
None of
Such
them,
as life.
exactly. So if I know that in my bones I can make contact with you, contact with my Kimberly, contact with my horses, contact with a student, contact with a stranger on the street, contact with my little 2-year-old neighbor. If I can do that, what I know then is that the rest will come.
Hmm.
And so I really would, if you have a different thought, I'd really love to hear that. I'm not sure that the goal is to become unconsciously competent at relationships because we don't know what's coming.
Fair enough. Life is improv, right? So we prepare, we don't plan,
Yes,
right? We
yes.
prepare. You are prepared. I am prepared. And I know there are certain things that I would do or used to do that caused friction.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. The way you
Yeah.
react, the way with something you say, and you learn to not do, like it's okay to not say that thing. You do not need to do that, right? It's
Right.
fine. Whatever was driving you to say, oh, I got, whatever it was, you can get, I'm attached to that. That goes away. Don't need it.
Mm-hmm.
So much so that now I will notice maybe hours later that there was a situation when I didn't do the thing I would have done in the past, and life just went on fantastic and there was no friction.
Mm-hmm.
And it was unconscious competence on that particular thing.
Exactly.
Right. And that particular thing. And that it's fair to say then, I think this is where we're going, is that life is mastery of 1,000 skills.
Yes.
And that you are somewhere in that circle on all of
Yes.
them. And some of them, the gods have determined you need to go through that circle a few times.
A little bit more times than I want to go through them.
Right? It's like why I learned when I was first becoming a Christian that you felt like you've dealt with this, and I said, no, God is putting that thing in your path again because you haven't dealt with it,
Right.
and you need to deal with that thing. Duey Freeman, I love our conversations.
I love our conversations, Mark.
And I dearly hope as I walked onto the TED stage that time, and Kimberly said to me, she said, you only need to change the mind of one person. And so I hope today that we were able to change someone's mind about a behavior, a pattern, a life skill, a goal, something that they were going to do, and now they're not going to do because they're going to be better for it. Okay, my friend.
Thank you very, very much.